at the time, talking about the end of the SDG, the MDGs, and how the BRICS might play a role in that, and the BRICS participation in the climate change negotiations, in using the formation called the BASIC, and the BRICS demonstrating their ability to influence beyond their size. To current discussions right now about what the role of BRICS in the post-COVID era, what the role of BRICS in the transformation of global governance, the economic, political, and other dimensions of this global governance, to current discussions about the BRICS expansion, BRICS and alternative financing mechanisms and all of that. Today we're talking about the financial landscape that BRICS might present for us. Many people are wondering whether BRICS is contributing to de-dollarization, and if it is, how it is doing it. Many people are wondering whether the new development bank would take the form later that the other multilateral banks take, like the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the IMF, and others. Many are wondering whether the new development bank will build stronger relationships with existing regional development banks, like the Development Bank of Southern Africa, the Asian Development Bank, the Asian Infrastructure Bank, and all of those. Many people are wondering whether the BRICS financing might enable faster implementation of sustainable development goals and all. So there are many questions that we need to wonder about as we approach the BRICS summit in about a week or two from now. So we just want to thank you all for being here. Much appreciated. All the visitors from all over. Great speakers, lineup of speakers. Without much further ado, allow me to invite the speakers to give us their input, followed by a question and answer session that will follow from there. Allow me to then, of course, welcome to University of Johannesburg, to also then invite our partner, Dr. Philani Mthembu, who is Executive Director for the Institute for Global Dialogue, to kickstart us. And then thereafter, I will go to Professor Irina Yarigina, who is with the Gimo University in Russia. Let's start with Professor with Dr. Mthembu, and I've already made you professor. I think you deserve it. Dr. Mthembu.
Thank you very much, Prof. Zondi. I'm glad that University of Johannesburg is already thinking about giving me a professorship. No, thank you so much, colleagues. I think this is a very sort of fascinating discussion, and something that has been a moving target, so to say. I mean, when we talk about, let's say, BRICS financing and the new development bank, the way I think about it is that it sort of showcases what I would say is the rise of Southern powers as sources of development cooperation. We could broaden that. We could just say Southern powers as sources of development finance. And I think this has been a trend that has been taking place now gradually over the past few decades. But I think more recent times, we're seeing a higher level of acceleration around this. So without sort of taking too much time, I want to highlight a few key areas that might be sort of important for the discussion going forward. We are way past the sort of heydays of where the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, but more specifically the members of the Development Assistance Committee of the OECD, where they were essentially responsible for, over 70%, 80% of development cooperation that was being extended to the developing countries. And what is important about that period of time, maybe late 70s, early 80s, around there, I think what was important then was that the fact that the OECD DAC countries were responsible for such a huge chunk of development finance also meant that they were largely seen also as the knowledge bank when it comes to international development finance. So many of the ideas around development, around the prioritization of certain development projects were really generated from within the OECD DAC. And, and when we fast forward from that period, we started to see, the rise of countries that I once called emerging powers, but now prefer to call southern powers, because I'm not sure how long they're going to be emerging for, when some of these countries have already surpassed countries that we refer to as, advanced industrialized countries. So I think it's these countries have made inroads into the development finance architecture. And I think we're finding ourselves, with this BRICS summit coming up in August, where we may talk about these southern powers, whereas they initially were moving to sort of reform the international financial architecture. I think now we're at a point where we can actually talk about how some of these reform efforts may actually lead to a transformation of the international financial architecture. And the new development bank has been key to that, not because it's one of the biggest, out there, but because it is, for me, one of the institutions that reflect what I would say are BRICS efforts to reform international financial institutions from within. So if we look at the debates within the IMF, we look at the debates around the World Bank, these countries have been calling for reforms from within these institutions. They've not left these institutions. They do not disregard these institutions. They see them as still very important, but they've pursued internal reforms within those structures. But dissatisfaction with those reforms and the pace of those reforms have also led to the creation of new institutions, such as the new development bank. And whereas in the past, we were talking more about southern actors, at an individual level, extending development finance. So you think about countries like China, you think about India, whether through their export and import banks, extending, things like buyer's credits, but also grants, concessional finance, and so forth. They have sought to distinguish themselves from these countries in the OECD DAC and the mode of lending that we have seen, from these particular countries. And so when we think about BRICS financing and the NDB, it comes as a product of some of these long-standing, let's say, tensions within the international financial architecture. And we're seeing them, the practical manifestation of BRICS countries seeking to demonstrate, that there are different ways of lending in terms of development finance, but also in terms of the type of projects that these countries have been financing. So we're moving from a reform agenda to even a transformative agenda. And of course, the NDB has played a key role in applying that pressure from the outside in terms of the reform of international financial institutions. Some of the, sort of going into the BRICS summit that's going to take place now, some of the key things I think that need to be noted is that, I mean, the NDB has already, has already approved loans worth about $35 billion, something like 96 projects in various areas, infrastructure, green sort of energy areas, port infrastructure, a whole range of areas. And I think that also is emblematic of how these countries from the South see the importance of building catalytic projects that will enhance, let's say, the development efforts of developing countries. Infrastructure is key. And it's not to say that other areas are not important, but these are enablers for developing countries. And there's a huge backlog, we know, in the developing world when it comes to infrastructure projects. But we know that there's also a gap when it comes to green finance and when it comes to sustainable infrastructure projects. And the NDB has sought to distinguish itself in that area. In a very short space of time, it's achieved, I think, quite a lot because I think there was a lot of skepticism generally towards BRICS and towards the cohesiveness of the grouping and whether they could keep it together. But I think the NDB shows that this grouping is serious and that they've gone out and actually established institutions. It's obtained a AA+ international rating or credit rating. And we've also seen the role it played during the COVID-19 pandemic in supporting its fellow member states. Looking ahead, I think what's going to obviously be important is that the NDB has already began its expansion, expansion of its membership. But I think what's going to be even more important now is the focus, the deepening of the focus in local currency financing and enhancing its credentials in green infrastructure projects and reducing carbon emissions. The target is that by 2026, it should be offering 30% of its loans in local currencies. And we know that this is a long-standing challenge for developing countries. They get a loan in dollar terms, and then we see fluctuations in currencies, and suddenly that finance becomes way more expensive than it was for them. So this is an effort to address this, and I think this is going to be quite important, obviously, moving forward. They're not starting from nowhere. They're already about up to 22% of the loans that are extended are already in local currencies. And I think this is going to reflect, if we're moving into a multipolar world order, then clearly the financial architecture also has to represent a multipolar world order. So Dilma Rousseff, for instance, who is currently heading the NDB, says we need to create a diversified global currency system. Now, this is not saying, BRICS is going to completely replace the US dollar. This is saying that the financial architecture or the financial system has to be more representative of the geopolitical landscape that we see. So as powers from the global south enhance their role, we will obviously see more usage also of their currencies to trade, to make and to settle, trade essentially. So this is going to be quite important going forward. Bangladesh is in, United Arab Emirates is in, Egypt is also in, and of course Uruguay is in the process of joining. And I think these are going to be quite important. So we've been talking about BRICS expansion, but the NDB has already started with its expansion. So BRICS and its architecture has already started, expanding. And I think, South Africa being the first, let's say the first country in an expanded BRICS, where before it was BRIC, and South Africa, in that sense, it becomes important that us chairing this year's BRICS and hosting the summit, that we see some significant movement when it comes to not only expansion of the membership, but also when it comes to some of these innovations in the global financial architecture. And certainly BRICS is going to be playing an important role. So let me end my remarks there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tamtebo, to start getting us started on that broad platform. We cross over to Russia. Our dear friend, Professor Irina Yarigna, head of Department of Economics and Banking Business at MGIMO University in Russia. The floor is yours, Irina.
Thank you very much indeed, dear colleagues. There is a problem of my presentation I have sent today in the morning to the attention of just the administrator. Probably somebody can help me with it. If not, so probably you can distribute it within our participants later. So then,
we have it. They're done. They're good. So,
great. In the meanwhile, let me greet you, dear colleagues, not only in the name of the university that is under the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, but also in the name of the National Committee on BRICS Research that is presented within BRICS. And I would like to thank all the members of the BRICS, because within the presidency of South Africa this year, we had a very fruitful discussion, and we consider that the results will contribute greatly to the development of our relations, and the Sherpas of our delegations will take care of them. So my presentation is dedicated to the challenges for NDB in fostering economic cooperation, and I would like to share some ideas and some proposals. The next slide, please. The next slide, please. So we know perfectly well that banks, and especially NDB, is participating in the market, helping the government to carry out just the projects and to reach the goals of the economic development of any country. And it also sticks to the regulations that exists in the international environment, and within its difficulty and just fluctuation in the market, just fulfills its main goals perfectly well, managing just the funds of the bank itself, the funds of the participants and the customers. Next slide, please. Within the projects that have the international interest as far as the development of infrastructure is concerned, education, medicine, and regional development. Next slide, please. We consider that one of the main aspects that should be paid attention to is just the development of the relations of the new development bank with the banks of development in our member countries and in partner countries who are just interested in implementing successfully the projects within the usage of public-private partnership vehicle, because it's just the mutual interests of private and the public institutions that help to manage assets and to lower risks of different projects within separation of responsibilities. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So here are examples of some projects that are also carried out by the banks of development of our member countries. They are mostly within the infrastructure development. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. And the banks for development have shown very good examples of using the PPP mechanism in implementing the projects in different countries. Here are some examples in China. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And that's also development mostly of infrastructure. Next slide, please. The Indonesia is giving a very good example of just using the PPP vehicle, and there is a very just important saying of Sukarno, the first president of Indonesia, who just stressed the point that the nationalism can flourish just on the basis of internationalism within the implementing the international projects and reaching the goals of the national economy. Next slide, please. And in Malaysia, next slide, please. Next slide, please. There are several examples of participating of the banks for development within different projects, especially medicine is very important, and it is also very important because we have a kind of a vehicle of technology transfer, and the support of the project within the technology transfer area will help to solve a lot of questions concerning the medical support, the education, energy production, and the support of innovations. That is probably of an interest to our governments, mostly should be supported by the banks of development, and the NDB bank should carry out just the supervision, being the lead manager of such kind of projects. Next slide, please. There are different phases for the banks of development to take part, and we consider that within that the design and construction can be the essential point for banks for development with NDB supervision. Next slide, please. The Singapore also just has given very nice examples of the usage of PPP vehicle within the banks for development, and there is the saying of the Singapore Prime Minister, characterizing the great role of private sector in creation wealth. And within the turbulent market, after the difficulty of the COVID-19 situation, the private sector can really contribute within the PPP projects. The next slide, please. Next slide, please. Here are some examples of the participation of the banks for development in Singapore in carrying out the projects of national interest. The next slide, please. So in Russia, we're just starting the development of the PPP structures, and the vehicle is used since 2005, and the essence is just the federal law or concession. The concessions is just an attracting just activity for the participants of the PPP projects, and the new Bank for Development should look certainly to this opportunity of using concessions within our countries and carrying out the projects that are of an interest. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. As far as the Russian Federation is concerned, and St. Petersburg, as an example, the projects were carried out by the banks of development that we have in the Russian Federation with the participation of international banks for development. Next slide, please. There are also several examples. In Moscow region, I have stressed your attention to Moscow and St. Petersburg. Next slide, please. But the PPP vehicle is used by the banks for development in our country within the Eurasian participation in different fields, also in residential building and machinery equipment production and things like that. Next slide, please. The key benefits of the PPP vehicle is quite clear, and the governments should of our partner countries and just not only of BRICS should take it into consideration that within the turbulence of the global market, this vehicle can be the essential one used as the main just for the projects that are looked after the banks for development, and especially NDB. Next slide, please. It goes without saying that development with the Eurasian Union is going on, and most of the members of the Eurasian Union have agreements with BRICS countries. Thus, we can go along the road of the customs union, the mutual market development, economic union, the currency union that is actually on a table, and just reach the goals of free economic cooperation. And the main role can be played by NDB as the essential bank of the member countries and its partners, because without the bank, nothing can be carried out. Any project will be in vain if the Bank for Development, especially NDB, doesn't supervise it. Next slide, please. The cooperation of NDB with banks for development will help to decide a lot of strategic problems and will contribute to different fields of our cooperation, technology transfer and professional challenges meeting, and just some other aspects that are presented to your kind attention. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
2 minutes.
Okay, if it's 2 minutes left, then there is the vehicle of financial and industrial cooperation of banks for development with the participation of NDB. Next slide, please. That is the possibility and the vehicle of NDB project support. Next slide, please. Within the project, as far as the Northern Sea route is concerned. Next slide, please. The setting up of the BRICS Eurasian payment system. Next slide, please. We should go along several phases of the development of our payment systems, not only as the usage of local currencies, but a single currency we should think about, because it's less risky to use the single currency than a multiple one. Next slide, please. That is the global currency structure, and I would like to pay attention to the essential point that the local currencies, BRICS local currencies, are of economic demand, and they possess the ability of using the currencies as for payments, savings, exchange base, desperation, and things like that. Next slide, please. It shows that currencies have a very nice future in building the international financial center, BRICS International Financial Center. But all, next slide, please, can be done on the basis of universal regulations and the mechanism of BRICS Stock Exchange Alliance was set up in 2017 and it's going on, and the NDB is just one of the participants of these markets. Next slide, please. So there are several banks that participate in the projects with NDB, just participation and supervision. Next slide, please. As far as harmonization in different fields, I have mentioned, and there are a lot of different fields. These are the crucial one. Next one. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. This is the slide that I should probably just pay your attention to, because probably you will have the opportunity, if there is an interest, to look through the presentation. That's the proposal of the kind of vehicle of the usage of PPP mechanism and the cooperation with banks for development. The new development bank as the essential one, then BRICS banks for development, and the banks of our partner countries can also participate as the lead managers. There are different fields that should be supervised, and there should be the distribution of the activity as far as the development of infrastructure projects are concerned, and not only. The next slide, please.
Please wrap up.
Yeah, this is practically all. Just there are several slides left, and the last slide will be so kind as just to show. So I would like to thank everybody for the kind attention, and if there are questions, I will be happy to answer them. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Irina. Much appreciated for those quite detailed ideas and outlines. And then we cross over the towards the Limpopo River. We have Professor Barwa Kanyana, who's Executive Dean for Management, Commerce and Law at the University of Venda here in South Africa. Kanyana has been involved with the BRICS Academic Forum for the longest time, I think, that we know. Professor Kanyana, the floor is yours. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Zondi, the chair of this session, and I'm very much humbled for being invited into this engagement. And I think indeed it comes at the right time when we are actually hosting we are the host of the BRICS community. But my talk today, of course, I will share my slides later because I want to talk briefly on the critical issues of importance around the New Development Bank, as it is referred to. Just to nuance it, that the BRICS summit in New Delhi, in 2012, with the BRICS leaders considered setting up this BRICS. So we are far ahead now. I mean, a period of a decade and plus. It is crucial to make a point here that the strides that the bank has made, it is an evidence of the BRICS as the emerging economic global power. So in that sense, spirit, an argument is even raised about how these BRICS countries work together through a shared arrangement of the New Development Bank, which I see it as an instrument of equalizer, because it is talking about a veto power that every member carries, that of a single member as carrying a veto power. That will therefore mean that not any country within the BRICS community stand out with muscling up financially, but at the same time, the New Development Bank become an equalizer, because when decisions are made, there is not kind of a hegemony of individualistic centric power that is hosted to muscle up within the BRICS community. So that veto power to me is a definer and a distinguisher compared to even the Bretton Woods instrument. So it is so much important to punctuate that. But the point of emphasis is, what are the three underlying motives of this bank that we are talking about today? Of course, the previous speakers have already commented about the financial architecture as an instrument to fund development, be the infrastructure, the green bonds, whatever green project could be. But what emerges more importantly also as the second underlying motive is about this foreign exchange or financial exchange realization, especially when we're talking about the currency swap as parallel to also de-dollarization. But the currency swap become another measure of resilience against the global economic turbulence. So the New Development Bank becomes a strong cushion for any challenges that come through. And COVID played it out, but that resilience from the BRICS community through this financial instrument was a test. And that litmus test was very crucial to see how the bank, even through its contingency reserve arrangement, the CRA, was also a multiplier of that resilience. But more importantly, the third motive about this BRICS Plus, and we are now beginning to see how the BRICS is emerging through this financial instrument, with the multilateral development banks coming in, the regionalization and the globalization become a critical player, because now BRICS is not just limited to 5 countries. The BRIC Plus is another multiplier of strengthening this economic or global power. which is the BRICS joining the Bretton Woods elite, ending the Western dominance over the global economy. So that to me is a fresh alternative, because all the time we've been finding ourselves being manipulated, but at the same time, this space was occupied as a monopoly. But when the new development bank comes into the place, it becomes one of the critical players to neutralize that Bretton Woods elite dominance of the Western. Though a decade old or decade, BRICS can solve problems of infrastructure. We have already alluded to that. But my point of emphasis, even in the South-South cooperation, it is so much important then to begin to see how the new development plan plays itself out with this instrument of trying to maximize development. So what comes very easily, as opposed to the World Bank or the IMF, is that the loan arrangements are the efficiency of applying for the loans and the loan procedures, that red tape is cut, and that efficiency turnaround time of 6 months or 6 months plus, that become a player, because in the emerging economies, to bring development into the space, it is so much important to make sure that the red tape is cut, so that that financial instrument become productive and effective. And this become a refreshing alternative, because we can also filter into the multilateral development banks that are already existed even before the new development bank that is existing. About 146 countries leveraging around these regional and also the national development banks, collaborating within this financial architecture of the National Development Bank, brings a slight change of the legacy of the World Bank. And the other point that I want to put is that the new development bank has been reinforced by the credit ratings. We also know that the Japan credit rating has given the new development bank that credibility of the AAA international credit rating in 2019, and that in itself reinforced the domestic and international capital markets to can leverage on the financial architecture of the BRICS. In my conclusion, there are 3 criticisms that are labeled or leveled against the new development bank. The first one, of course, is the issues around de-dollarization. And it should not be seen that de-dollarization is because of the prevailing wars between and Russia-Ukraine wars that are prevailing, and with the pressure coming from the West. It is not about that, because the dollarization project has even existed or prevailed earlier, and those talks need to come very strongly, because the dollarization is a way to go to make sure that the currencies and also the alternative arrangements are prevailing against the US dollar. And that, to me, is a defining moment, even at this point, and it needs to be accelerated. And those talks need to come very clear and should not be polluted by the prevailing power struggles that are prevailing worldwide. The second criticism leveled against the new development bank, it is portrayed as if the bank is biased to the Asian or the Asian bias. And that Asian bias is very important to put it on the spot, because the BRICS financial architecture is a leveling playing field. It is not necessarily biased. Even when you check also in the African continent, you can able to see that there are some financial injections that are coming into the space. The last criticism that I want to put across is the civil society. In most cases, even these projects, the infrastructure project, the green project that are aligned to the sustainable development goals, the civil society voice is fade. And I think that from the planning phase of this loan arrangement or the infrastructure arrangement, they need to recognize the civil society to play in the space, because there need to be a social justice. When we putting together an infrastructure project, it need to have that social justice element, because we may find ourselves falling in the traps of the IMF and the World Bank, where there was a structural arrangement which damaged the African continent. So, for example, the 2018, the Life Africa protested outside the offices of the New Development Bank in Sandton, which is an amicus curiae of the planet, so that we don't damage the planet with the climate changes that are prevailing when we are talking about infrastructure. Hence, we are talking about the green project. So the voice of the civil society is very critical to make sure that the social justice is prevailing in all respect. And I want to end my talk here to argue that the New Development Bank is a very important instrument to make sure that the BRICS emerge, not necessarily emerge, it has already emerged as a global power to balance these powers, so that the South-South cooperation is also prominent and be seen to be crucial in pushing development that translates into the impact in the society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Kanyane, for pointing out all of those things that you've just pointed out now. The next speaker, he's from China but works here in South Africa, Professor Kin. Professor Kin is with the University of South Africa. He is an alumni of the Association of China-Africa Smallholder Agriculture Association that is promoting agricultural cooperation between China and Africa. Professor Kin, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Dondi, and thank you, the Sustainable Development. Thanks for the University of Johannesburg and also Institute for the Pan-African Thought and Conversation, and also the IJD. So giving me this opportunity. Now I also want to introduce myself. The last one, Prof. Hanina, I think is my brother, because I have two hometowns. The first one, I'm from China, and the second one, I'm from Limpopo. So I'm a weather guy. That is why I call him my brother. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. For me, it's me to sit here, to speak, to share the information. But for me, I'm the professor from UNISA, SBL, School of Business Leadership, and also the chairperson of ACASA. ACASA is Association of China, Africa, Small Agriculture, and also CAVIS. CAVIS is China, Africa, Women, Youth, and Science and Technology. So for me, it's not only me sit here. It's I represent thousands of small farmers, maybe 10,000 of small farmers, and also the membership of CASA. So we want to share our project, our collaboration, wide collaboration between China, Africa, China, and our South Africa to explain the BRICS financing and the new development bank. For me, for the my research is about the leadership, governance for IR and agriculture, BRICS, Africa, and also China, Africa research. But for the Africa and BRICS is a little bit new for me. So for me, I also learning from all of experts and professors via this platform. As I mentioned, platform, so BRICS is a platform. So for our South Africa, for China, we should use this platform to benefit our people, to make our people get a high life level. And also for this, the new development bank. So this is the multilateral platform, and they focus on the economic rules and also sustainability, especially in terms of infrastructure, how to use the financial resource to improve the infrastructure, and also how to benefit the emerging market. For the emerging market, especially for South collaboration, and also the sustainability is core of the mandate of NDB. And for the research, for the focus area for the NDB, I just went through the website and to get the 6 areas. First one is clean energy and energy efficiency. The second one is transport and infrastructure. Now for the third one, for the transport infrastructure, I just want to share my experience in China and in our South Africa. I don't want to compare 2 countries or compare the different countries. I just want to show something I have went through. For the last several days, I've been to Lesotho. So from Pretoria to Lesotho, I should use the N1. For the national route in our South Africa is fine, but for the regional one, it's a little bit terrible. Why I do use the terrible this word? I used the R708. For that route, it's roughly 30 kilometers, but it was really terrible because there is lots of pool there. So I should drive very slow. And in China, I still remember at the beginning of 2000. So for every local township, for the county level municipality, we start to build the new route, the new street. Why? Because there is a Chinese saying, if you want to reach, first to build the route. So after that, you can imagine between 2000 and now this year is 2023. Even in rural areas, so the route is good. Why? Especially in the mountains. If you want to get rid of the poverty, you need the route. Because the transport, the delivery trucks, they can go to the rural area directly and they can fetch the product there. Even for because my focus is about agriculture, so for me, I always use the rural revitalization and the poverty alleviation in rural areas to explain this finance and the new development bank. So for that one, if we can deliver the product from the rural areas to the big city, for the people they live in Johannesburg, they can get a high quality product. And for the small farmers live in rural areas, they can get their profit. So China, they use this model. So I just want to use this, but for that township, the route is even inside the township because we want to get the hotel. So we traveled inside the township. The route was really bad. But in China, as I mentioned, I do not want to compare, but I don't want to share my experience. And the third one is for water and sanitation. And now we collaborate with the National Department of Women, Youth and Disability. So we want to train the women and youth in our South Africa via the aquaponics. And I visit the aquaponics in Pretoria. There, so they get a water from that water. So that water is good for our health. And we know 2 months ago there was bad news in north of Pretoria. So for our people, they drink the water, but they get some disease, and several people they died. If we can get more this water, why this technology? So if we can collaborate with this, the new development bank to benefit these stakeholders, get this technology, and also get the water. The water it can treat cancer, can treat some disease. I drink the water. It tastes very good. If we have opportunity, maybe someday I will invite you to that site to visit. And also environment protection. I think for Africa, the environment protection is good. For China, the environment is bad now because we have lots of pollution there. And also for social infrastructure. For social infrastructure, we should mention about the school. 2 weeks ago, there was another BRICS conference. There was a very young female leadership asked me one question. So in our South Africa, how do we train our youth from primary school or from high school to get this digital, to get this high technology? I think this is a really very good question. Even for me, I do not know how to answer in South Africa, but in China, you know, I told them, because in South Africa, our former president, Nelson Mandela, mentioned that education is the best way to change our fate. But in China, for the parents, they treat education very well. So they will bring all the best to their children, because between 1980 to 2015, so China will use the one-child policy. So for the parents, only one child. So we will put all our best things, the best education to our children. So if they want to learn the digital education or the big data, IoT, something like this, so we will bring them to go to the education camp or maybe the actual school to learn after school time. And also next one, I think it should be the health. When we get rich, the health is the most important one. Now we are talking with the Chinese company. It's a big company. We want to bring this biotechnology company to Northern Cape, because Northern Cape treats me very seriously. As I mentioned, I'm the chairperson for ACASA and ACAVIS. So we have different meetings with different provinces in our South Africa. We also want to bring more resource to our South Africa, because the Northern Cape treats me very seriously. So we will bring this resource there. And also last week I had a meeting with Standard Bank. So I know before I never have I never had any meeting with the banks, but now I know the banks is very important. And after that, after this meeting, so maybe in the future, I know that the new development bank is based in Shanghai. Shanghai is a financial hub. And in the future, I know now, because after I got the invitation, so some of our membership and my friends, they sent me they sent me this one to tell me, oh, Prof, you are taking this one, so please speak for us. So in the future, we will talk with maybe the new development bank to bring more opportunity and for our stakeholders in South Africa. We know after 2015, when this NDB opened, so they have approved as our colleagues, Dr. Filani mentioned, they have approved roughly 100 projects. Every project is big one. Even for our colleagues from Russia, from her PPT, she has demonstrated some project from different countries. And also for our NDB, they have put roughly $30 billion to this project. So if we can bring more opportunity for our stakeholders in South Africa, I think it should be a very good topic. And also, the CEO of the NDB mentioned 2023 is the 100-year anniversary for the concept of the, it's 10 years. Sorry, it's 10 years. I'm sorry. The concept of the community with the shared future for mankind globally. So I think this is a good platform for us. And also, I also want to mention our collaboration in First State. So we are doing the high technology training in First State for the youth. Now we are doing the robotics training, but in the future we will do big data, IoT, AI, and smart manufacture there. Yeah, because we collaborate with the GP4IR. And also in the future we will maybe talk with the NDB to bring more opportunities there. And also, when I talk with our small farmers and stakeholders in our South Africa, the first challenge is what? Is finance. Okay, I will be conclude very soon. And for us, for ACASA, also as a professor, so we use our networking to bring them the finance, the capital, and also the whole value chain. But after this meeting, after this conference, after this platform, maybe we will use this platform to bring them more opportunity. The last one I want to mention is about the training for the women and youth. That inequality is everywhere. And also Dr. Valenti mentioned that the world order is changing now. So for us, we use the TikTok to train the women youth in our South Africa. Also, we are doing collaboration in Rwanda. But in the future, I hope for our small farmers and stakeholders, we can use this NDB, get more collaboration. The last one is the question: what is the South Africa role in this new development bank? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those nuggets of practicalities, Professor Kim. We heard that. We will be reflecting on those. I appreciate it again. Professor Karin Vasquez is the Executive Director for the Center of African, Latin American, and Caribbean Studies, CALA. And she hails from Brazil and she works in China. It's fully BRICS, and she's now speaking from South Africa. If she knew, she would have had left her bag in China and her classes in Russia, then she would be fully in BRICS at the same time. Thank you very much. Karin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's such a treat to be speaking at the University of Johannesburg and with such esteemed colleagues from South Africa. It just reminds me that last week I was sitting in a BRICS meeting in China and I had a chance to meet many of you online and some of them in person, mostly the Chinese colleagues, and I'm sitting with a South African colleague. So it's a big gift for me. It's a true privilege. So thank you very much for having me today. And I believe it's a double privilege actually to be talking about financing in the BRICS and the new development bank. because to my perspective, among the many progress and achievements that the BRICS have made over the past 15 years, right? Just to remember how far we've come. I think it's the BRICS economic and financial cooperation that actually brought visibility to the group and ensure some really practical outcomes as well. And just to quickly recap, in the 5-year cycle of the BRICS, so from 2009 and 13, the BRICS advocated for the reform of the IMF, the World Bank, to reflect the aspirations of the rise of the emerging economies. The second 5-year cycle from 2014 and 18, the BRICS offered alternatives to these international financial architecture, and Pilani already mentioned this very well, through the establishment of the new development bank and the contingent reserve arrangement, for the financing of infrastructure and also provision of liquidity to emerging economies in developing countries. And I think Kanyani mentioned the importance of these institutions and collaborations within an Asian context, and we automatically associate with China, but I would add that India also provides many interesting contributions to this finance as two of the top shareholders of the new development bank, also the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and what I'm framing in my research as the new Asian Development Finance. But this is, I'll park for the moment, and hopefully we'll have a separate seminar at some point to discuss. The third cycle, we had a kind of a stalemate within the BRICS, mainly due to the significant changes in the political directions domestically in many of these countries, and my own included, Brazil. Also the economic slowdown, we had the pandemic, so many challenges, the relations between India and China, so many issues affecting the balance within the BRICS, and also the ability of the grouping to provide concrete results, right? And this has raised many perceptions about concerns about the effectiveness of and the impact of the bloc. Luckily, we are now starting a new cycle, a fourth cycle of the BRICS. I think it's a good time to take stock of what we have achieved so far and what we need to do going forward. And again, finance and economic cooperation is certainly one of the key pillars going forward, and how we can bring many other topics to this. And I believe that the NDB is certainly one of the catalysts for these different initiatives that we can promote going forward in this fourth cycle of the BRICS. And I'm going to highlight 3 areas which I think we could possibly look more closely and for this summit in South Africa in a few weeks and forward. And the first one has already been mentioned by different colleagues, which is increasing the representation of emerging economies in developing countries in the financial system. And again, a lot has been said about de-dollarization, reducing the influence of the dollar, but this is an effect. The goal is to increase representation, multilateralism. And for different reasons, the motivations for the different countries, they vary. They are both in terms of improving access to facilitating trade, both in terms of accessing markets and reducing transaction costs, reducing currency risk, strengthening local capital markets. And one of the ways of doing this is through the use of local currencies. So the BRICS payment system, Irina has already discussed a lot about it in many details. It's certainly a very concrete way that we can move ahead in that direction, and which has already been agreed in previous summits in 2015 and 19, agreements within the BRICS leaders to increase intra-BRICS trade in national currencies. And have seen a lot of progress as well bilaterally. Many of our countries have been signing bilateral agreements to transact in local currencies. Brazil and China just this year signed one. There are similar agreements between Russia and India, Russia and Latin American countries. Not even to mention China and Russia have already been cooperating on that front for several years. I think the goal now is how to create an ecosystem to bring these different bilateral pieces into an umbrella that will allow a greater impact for these different initiatives. And an ecosystem or an umbrella that eventually allows the inclusion of new countries as well that might want to participate in this payment system, which is starting with BRICS, but can be beyond BRICS, and eventually even associate this process with the BRICS expansion itself. So this is something that we could possibly think, including to reduce some of the skepticism or concerns, and very legitimate, included about BRICS expansion and how are we going to agree on agendas with a bigger number of countries, in addition to other concerns that different countries may have. But in this particular point, if you can move forward with expansion with a clear instrument that will bring these new members and the original members together to deliver something that is ambitious and robust and makes sense for these countries individually, but also within the multilateral system, it's very concrete and impactful, and I think at the level of the ambition that the BRICS should aim for. The second, and still very briefly, still on this issue of increasing the use of local currencies, is certainly the role that the new development bank can have in this process. And Pilani and others have already mentioned the targets that are already in the strategy of the bank to increase lending in local currencies to up to 30% by 2026. Currently, the bank lends 22% in local currencies, but this is mainly in RMB. So the goal now is there's not much to reach a target, but this effort needs to be done in other currencies, in rands and rupees and real and in other currencies. So that's the challenge. And so moving forward with the second point that I see in our future cooperation in this spectrum of financial economic cooperation, Professor Ting, thank you so much for bringing the examples on infrastructure. I fully agree that sustainable and inclusive industrialization and having infrastructure as the framework to move ahead is a very clear path that we can pursue, and have seen the example of China and other countries in East Asia and Southeast Asia as well, who massively invested in infrastructure and who massively invested in education as well, and had, as a result, the framework necessary for rapid growth, and probably one of the fastest growths that we have seen in planet Earth in such a short time span, right? We were talking about like a complete transformation of people's lives in one generation. And that's quite impressive, and that's the lesson that we need to take with us. But more than that, we have also learned from these experiences that this growth needs to be inclusive and needs to be sustainable, environmentally sustainable. So the point here is that, again, using the instrument that the new development bank has with the mandate to promote sustainable infrastructure, how we can leverage resources to projects that will be structural for the transformation of these countries, of these economies. Structural in what sense? To promote endogenous technological capacities that will create jobs, that will contribute to reducing emissions, include countries or economies in new global value chains. So in an essence, increased productive inclusion across the whole spectrum of the 2030 development agenda. So that's a point that we need to look at. And there have been some studies on how, for example, the NDB could potentially create incentives within its financing to attract projects that will be more in line with these ideas of transformational development. Not to say that it's not going to finance other projects, but just to give incentives for actors to move, to steer towards projects that are more transformational in their nature. But also, like looking more broadly now in terms of how to advance and increase the scale of the impacts of these projects. And Professor Zondi at the beginning said one of the many questions that we're raising is how to streamline NDB with the SDGs. Many of our countries are promoting initiatives, global initiatives. The Belt and Road is certainly one of the most famous ones, but we also have the International Solar Alliance that is being promoted by India. We also have the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty that have been signed an MOU for cooperation and social development between Brazil and China, and that foresees the creation of this alliance. In South Africa, there is a just energy transition partnership. How could the New Development Bank also align its financing with these initiatives that are being promoted, these global initiatives that are being promoted by its own member states? And again, with a view of increasing the reach, the scale, and the impact within member states and beyond, right? Just to conclude, I start talking and then I don't finish. So unless you raise the red flag, I'm not going to stop. I do every now and then. So like if you start to frown at me, then I'll stop. And I think a last point that I think we should be looking at going forward is how this economic and financial cooperation and the instrument that we have in hand, the New Development Bank, can help our countries navigate some of the global transformations that we are seeing. And this is very serious. We've seen how the pandemic affected our economies, but also how development challenges are increasingly complex or increasingly transboundary in nature. And as a result, they also require collective action, cooperation. Certainly finance is a very important pillar, which the NDB and other multilateral development banks have been providing countries. But I believe there is an additional role that these banks and the NDB in particular could do. And I think someone mentioned, I think Bilani at the beginning mentioned how many multilateral development banks also play the role of knowledge banks. And why not the NDB playing the role of a knowledge bank of the global south? And in essence, not to produce knowledge, but to connect with the knowledge that already exists in these countries. And not only just to remain a lean and green and whatever other lean organization that the EIB and the NDB aspire to be, but precisely to make an exercise and one recognize that an institution doesn't hold the knowledge in all the countries and recognize the value of the knowledge that exists in these countries, not only in academia, not only in think tanks, but in the society, in the governments, in the private sector, and other actors. And how they can possibly create a system to quickly connect with these different networks, with these different actors, to assess the needs, assess the demands, assess the best practices, assess the knowledges, the experiences, and bring these ideas forward in their projects, in intergovernmental negotiations, platforms these countries are participating. Remember, this year India is hosting the G20. Next year is Brazil, and then South Africa. There is the finance track within the G20. Just to take one example, many discussions on sustainable finance, many discussions on the reform of international financial institutions, and we have a bank. The World Bank is participating, the Asian Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank. Why cannot we have our banks participating in these, actively participating in these discussions, and connecting with the networks to assess what are the demands, what are the visions, and infusing these visions into these intergovernmental processes. But also infuse these visions into its own lending in a way that, as we talk about the different transformations that are happening in the role, and the need for collective action, also helping the knowledge gathered through these lines or the platforms that the NDB could potentially provide, also help us anticipate, understand the impacts of these transformations to other countries, and then not only help the NDB prepare, how countries prepare to these transformations, but also better align the lending and the work that the NDB is doing to assist these countries in this preparation process. So I'll stop here. And these are some initial thoughts. Again, thank you all very, very much. And I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We really had quite a lot. There's a lot to mull over. Without much further ado, I am going to invite comments, questions, proposals, even more. I invited the latter more than the former. Yeah, and you're allowed to also pose a question that you also answer. That helps a lot. And can we start online? Can we have, I see there's one hand online, or can we take them in the order that they are? It's ladies something, I can't see the full name, but LM, please, let's have you give me a list
Sure.
in their order. LM, can we have your question or not? Please keep it short. Introduce yourself. Keep it short.
I will keep it short.
So that we can have as many people as contributing as possible. Yes, you have the floor, Lady M. LM.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the key presentations that's been raised. I'm Chantal Maxim. I'm the Business Development Director of the Informal Economy Development Forum. I've got one critical question, which is quite important, and Madhubing, I hope I got your name right, actually raised some soft communication around it. Now, we all know that the informal economy plays a critical role in the building and the development of the economy at large. Now, we're talking around global financial infrastructure. Is NDB looking at special projects pertaining to the informal economy to assist around that aspect? And will it be tabled at the BRICS summit, where we will be talking around the recommendation 204? With one of the BRICS summits that happened in China, that was one of the topics that was tabled. However, it is a point now where we have to stand firmly together and work as a collective in the transformation around the informal economy. So my question is, are we looking at, from a project perspective, NDB around the informal economy, the transformation, the financial inclusion, and will it be one of the points that will be tabled at the BRICS summit?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lady Maxim. Now we have Reg Nkosi. You have the floor, Reg.
Thanks very much. I hope you can hear me.
Could you speak up to the extent possible?
Okay. Thanks very much for the wonderful event. My contribution is about the next step for the NDB or the BRICS Bank. Now, as we see today, the BRICS Bank is formed along the line of the IMF as a stabilization fund, or as a fund almost equivalent to the IMF. But this is an odd way of looking at international cooperation that is consistent with the Bretton Woods system. Okay, I think for me, what would be newer and very consistent with the BRICS agenda would be for the BRICS Bank to become more of a clearing union, as suggested by Keynes a while back, instead of it just being a stabilization fund or bank, as we have it today. Therefore, it should be coordinating, if we want, the multilateral payment systems within the BRICS and completely reordering the Bretton Woods system upon which the BRICS Bank is sort of modeled to a newer system, which would allow us a lot more freedoms and of course depart completely using any currency, like the dollar and so on, as we use in the CRA, to rather a multilateral system. These are my observations. I think perhaps I would like to invite comments from all these colleagues who have been presenting here.
Thanks, Reg. We have Isaac Ntako. Isaac Ntako, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, esteemed colleagues, for such a wonderful presentation.
Yes, Isaac.
Isaac Ntako, can you hear me?
Faintly, if you could.
Let me speak closer to the mic. Is it better now?
Microphone.
Is it better now?
Please proceed.
Yes. So I lead a consulting company called Growth Corp Africa, where we assist project developers, SMEs, raise capital, and do business development. To me, in my assessment, BRICS presents a serious market. But as you would appreciate, one of the biggest challenges that SMMEs are facing is not just access to markets, but also access to capital. When BRICS was formed, I think, when the BRICS Bank, a new development bank, was formed, for most of the years, it was just funding public projects. To what extent is the BRICS Bank or New Development Bank ready and willing to support SMMEs and private sector, given the fact that we know that the key catalyst in accelerating economic development is supporting small to medium enterprises? I'd like to stop right there. Thank you so much. I welcome input from the esteemed presenters that have contributed thus far. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Isaac. Then we have Lerato Sebe.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for these presentations. I just wanted to ask, I'm sorry if I can't from Russia, on your presentation on triple Ps. I think it's a very interesting way to obviously enhance economies of BRICS. I'm just trying to understand and wonder, though, feasibly, how would we interlink private-public partnerships across all 5 of the current BRICS members if the legislative regimes that govern the role and movement, let's say, and agility of the private sector in each individual country? So would we need an additional regime of laws to be able to make exception and room for BRICS states? So that's just my query.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we come back to the room. I wonder if there's any input, question. Yes, we start with you, my friend, and then our colleague. Yeah, any on the left side of the room, on the people on the right side of the room. Only the right wingers have an issue. And then I see Oye on the left. We'll check them in that order to just go around. I saw you, Ojo. Yes.
Thank you, Prof. My name is
Great
Jan.
to see you.
Great to see you too. My name is Yanda Mchugula from Africa Fisheries Property and Infrastructure Development Company. First question I have is if I look at the presentation from Professor Rina from Russia, if you look at most countries, Islamic countries, Malaysia, Singapore, and them, a lot of the funding has gone to things like education and social housing, what they call affordable housing. So far in South Africa, the BRICS Bank or the New Development Bank has not done any of such social housing developments. No student accommodation. I know for sure they have been in talks with DBSA to try and outsource us to DBSA. I'm not sure if it's the right move to do. Which brings me to my next issue, that what was raised by Professor Kanya, that normally it takes about average 6 months to get approval from these institutions, IDC, DBSA, and them. That's way too long for any project. If you, for example, a practical example, there was a project here, right here, for student accommodation, was finance. If you're gonna wait for 6 months, in 3 months, it's gone already. So 6 months is way too long. What can the BRICS Bank do to shorten that? Normally, the commercial banks, it takes about 3 weeks, 4 weeks to approve a proposal. 6 months is totally out. It's not because that the bank maybe needs a bit of to be empowered a bit, of which takes me to my next point, that is there room between IPATC to partner with the bank to say, look, we can assist you as scholars, as academics, to help you to beef up your bank, in terms of having research and assisting you to at least make sure that you are aligned with what are the needs of South Africa. And then the third one is that it goes back to what Professor Kayana said, that there is a perception that the BRICS Bank favors more Asian buyers or projects than others. It's not because maybe here in South Africa, our BRICS Bank is not fully equipped to do more projects. Maybe we should roster our office in South Africa so there can be more projects. Because I've seen so far in South Africa, I think they've done about 5.8 million rand for projects, compared to total of 32 throughout. So surely the problem might be in the office here in South Africa. That needs to be bossed out a little bit. And then the last one, it goes back to what one of the speakers have said, is that mainly the BRICS Bank finance government projects. And we all know that government work with big projects. Mainly, if you take out the amount in terms so far of 5.8, majority of money went to ESCOM and Transnet. We know that small business, it is correct to say, small business are the ones that create jobs, are the ones that build economies. So the BRICS Bank should not focus more on the small businesses rather than focusing more on big business, which is government businesses. Thank you.
I'm awfully sorry interrupting, dear colleagues. If possible, I should leave you in 10 minutes. If possible, I can answer just the questions addressed to me, probably, because I should leave, if possible. Can I take the floor and answer some questions before I leave?
Okay, then proceed to break the questions and answer and give you an opportunity to answer. Then we'll take another round of questions. Yes, Irina, you want to give?
Thank you very much indeed. It's very kind of you. But the thing is, I have another appointment and I should leave very soon. There are 3 questions that I would like to answer. The first concerns formal and informal economy and the possibility of financing the informal economy. The thing is that the Banks for Development, and as far as the NDB is concerned, is just the intergovernmental financial institution and institutions, and they are within the process of GDP production and financing the GDP production. As far as the informal economy is concerned, in some countries it is not included as the factor of the GDP production. It's the very important aspect to make the informal economy the formal one. Is the question of the intergovernmental agreement, whether it should be put into the calculation of the GDP, and then the banks for development can probably just participate in financing of the informal projects more actively, as it was done in Italy, because Italy has come to conclusion that the informal economy should be financed and included into GDP, and it gave just plus 5% just to the result. So it's the question of the agreement, and the banks for development are the vehicles of financing the industry that is with the mostly the GDP production. The question concerning the PPP mechanism. The governments should have priorities to some instruments. It's as far as swaps are concerned, and some financial operations and just guarantees and things like that. The trade finance, and they should be backed by universal approach. I have an experience of more than 15 years working within the International Bank for Economic Cooperation, with the formal participation of the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, Mongolia, Vietnam, and some other countries. And we have come to conclusion, and we use such kind of the vehicle on a special agreement between governments with its special priorities. Priorities for the BRICS members, for the NDB members, and things like that. So the answer is just yes, we need harmonization of relations within the usage of the PPP vehicle, and not only. As far as the cooperation with the countries that are not, that are our partners, let's put it like that, it is very precious that the countries are looking forward to joining BRICS, to cooperation with BRICS, and it is really highly appreciated by our side, and I consider by all country members. And we have a lot of fields of cooperation, judging from the interests, the strategic interests of each country. So the thing that we are open for cooperation, and in each country that there is the BTTC participants, and any can just submit proposals to a relevant institution or to a relevant body in the country who is responsible for such kind of an activity. Next year, Russia will follow the presidency of South Africa. That is really very successful at the moment, and just will succeed. And if there is anything, our National Committee on BRICS Research will be happy to get your proposals, to think about, and to come to conclusion, and to discussion and to conclusion of the different aspects of cooperation. Thank you very much indeed. On this note, I would like to thank you for giving me the possibility to participate in discussion. I would like to thank all the presenters for their profound contribution to our meeting, and staying in line and online for all your questions. Welcome, please. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Irina. Much appreciated. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for those input. Thank you for that response. Really, really much appreciated. I hope all is good and all is well that side. We will miss your voice for the remainder of the roundtable, but we understand it. Have a lovely day further.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. We will then resume the questions so that we'll finish that round, then we'll give the other colleagues a chance to speak. And I think I was here. Yes, and then Dr. Ojo and Dr. Oya.
Thank you. Alex Nunley's Trinity University in the UK. So thank you to all presenters. Really fascinating insights into BRICS-led development finance. And you all raised issues about a transition away, or the benefit or potential benefits of a transition away from Bretton Woods or the sources of finance. And we're all really familiar with the kind of critiques of that source of development finance, both in terms of the geopolitics, but also the the gender politics, the climate politics, the elite politics, all of that, the distribution of costs and benefits that came with that. And I wonder if I could push you more to say more about the opportunities and costs and potential mitigations, picking up your kind of point, associated with BRICS-led development finance, both in terms of managing the risks of de-dollarization, because I think there are significant geopolitical risks associated with the politics of that, particularly in the United States, and where that pushes US foreign policy. But also the geopolitical distribution of opportunities and risks within BRICS, and you all talked about the potential for expansion. And then also, what kind of alternative globalization does that look like in terms of gender, in terms of climate, in terms of your point about rural finance, about towns and cities, about new inequalities, or perhaps mitigating and managing inequalities. So I just wondered if you could think a bit more about the so what of what the BRICS alternative to development finance might look like, and how it might be made perhaps more equitable and sustainable into the future.
You said what I wanted to ask.
Oh,
actually.
sorry.
Okay, thank you so much for all the presentations. I was just telling him now that it seems he was actually reading my mind on what I wanted to ask. We all know that the themes on, or the nuances on inequality, oppression, discrimination, violence, and all these things are problems that are actually shared by the BRICS community, especially for women. However, most often we always hear the generic policies and initiatives for the African communities, and actually excluding specifically women. So I would like to ask specifically, what are the initiatives or the developmental finance strategies that have been set aside for women in Africa to advance their cause? Being the fact that after COVID, we all know that women were left more vulnerable than any other gender. And also, being the fact that in most African countries, we have higher representation of women than men. And he was talking earlier on about the initiatives on infrastructure for women in agri business. There's an ongoing research we are doing now. I'm looking at women in the rural communities, and especially in the agri business. And most of them, have been actually left vulnerable and excluded in terms of financial inclusion. And this is actually a nuance that, it seems all stakeholders keep dancing around, and there are no specific direction on how to approach this. So what is BRICS community doing? How do we advance this cause? How do we empower women? Thank you.
So I guess it falls in under the broader question of how inclusive are all these systems. And anyway, what did you say to Alex? You intimidated him or something? I don't know what you said. You took over before you took your question. Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah.
You're too close for comfort.
Are you okay, Alex? Oh. I need to include you. Yes.
Thank you, Prof.
Yeah.
Permit me to speak from a Pan-African standpoint. And when I begin to follow the debate, and I also noted one of the speakers said the process started a long time ago, but there's no doubt it accelerated after the Ukraine-Russia war. So what is the major priority of this new development? I'm asking that because if it is being motivated exclusively because of the war, then the processes will be different. There's every tendency to rush into it. There's every tendency to have some hegemonic ulterior motive, which might not be too clear to even all the smaller powers that wants to be part of the financial economic community. Secondly, and this one is, I don't think it's likely, but it's something we should also think about. What will happen, or what will be the future of this new financial architecture if the West, including the United States, are able to defeat Russia in this current war, as it happened in 1989, 1991? What will be the future of these BRICS and the new financial architecture? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thought Oya being the last one speaking in this week would make it easier for our dear invited guests. And then there he fires a very difficult question. I'm not to blame for all of this. You guys are experts. Can I take you in the order that you came? So I start, can I start online? Can I start with Professor Kanyane? Then I come to Professor Pilar.
Thank you.
I said Professor Pilar.
I acted like I did.
Yes, Professor Kanyane.
Yeah, I think the professor there is probing, sort of assumptions that need to be empirically tested. So he has the answers as well, I believe. But I think what is very important, like as I said before, especially this issue of de-dollarization, I agree that it should not be rushed and it should not be put under the pressure of the West because we'll end up committing mistakes. We need to allow the discourse, we need to allow the research to inform that process of de-dollarization, because it's not an event, it's not an overnight, it's a work that needs to be done. I know even in the African continent, we have been talking about the consolidating the currencies. So that consolidation process is in phases until to the point where the environment is ripe, where we can because truth be told, there are some currencies and volatilities of these currencies, and the level of risk is very high. So it's not something that we can just put it as a rule book and then implement it at the go. So I think we need to, for now, we need to allow more conversations around it and then able to make that determination when the situation is right. But the consolidation of the currencies and the currency swaps is something that can start as phases into that final stage. I think the other issue which was raised about the turnaround time of these loans, I think, of course, I do agree that we need to maximize more capacity in that, because, of course, in any banking, protocols, there are verification checks. I was just saying that as opposed to, the World Bank, which has its own stringent, arrangement that take longer and even accompanied by conditionalities. So I think it's a starting point, but I believe that the bank can do more with lesser turnaround time, and that is through the maximization of the efficiencies of these banking operations. On the issue around SMEs, I think this is a point that need to be relooked. Of course, there are different financial, products and mechanisms to accommodate these small to medium enterprises. the bank allows the issues around syndication, which is a syndicated loans. It's a group of banks that are together in a hybrid instrument to accommodate even this small medium. So it's not necessarily the new development bank, but it's the syndicated arrangement of the banking instruments that need to trickle down even to the small medium, and also equity or quasi-equity arrangement where these banks become business partners, not necessarily just dishing loans. So I think those are questions which I thought I would address for now.
Thank you very much, Professor Kanyane Pilani.
Yes, colleagues, I think maybe just to touch on a few. There's maybe ending with there was the question around the sort of the role of women, the expressed role of women. The one, or I mean, not the only one, but I think a significant development has been around the establishment of a network for female entrepreneurs within BRICS, which is the Women's Business Alliance. And the Women's Business Alliance has chapters in each of the 5 countries. I think about 5 representatives in each country that may vary, but essentially also functioning in a similar way to the BRICS Business Council. And I know that in the 2017 chairing, when South Africa chaired the BRICS, this was, looked at as quite a strong priority. So I'm sort of, without, going into too much, I think there's work that is basically going on in this area, so that it's not that, at times there's a tendency to look at issues and then to say, and women and youth, and then it's like, okay, well, we've been inclusive. But I think this is, sort of as a standalone alliance, I think the intention was, to really give it its own traction, but also the institutional framework so that it can actually carry out its work. I think there's definitely merit in sort of going even deeper and saying, okay, what are some of the fruits that the alliance has actually seen? So I think that there's definitely merit in going a lot further and zoning into its work. I do think in terms of, let's say, the role of the conflict in Ukraine and sort of how that fits into the changing financial architecture, I think it's important to note that this was certainly not the catalyst. I think these discussions definitely precede the conflict in Ukraine. However, what is important is that obviously the conflict will accelerate some of these discussions, whether it's on, the unilateral sanctions and their impact specifically on Russia. I mean, we saw that in the Russia-Africa summit, that Russia aims to grow its trade with Africa. By 2026, it aims to grow it to, from 18 billion to about 60 billion. One of the big challenges that are going to be there in getting there is actually dealing with the unilateral sanctions that have been imposed on Russia, but also how, these alternative payment systems will actually be accelerated. And I, sort of take, let's say, the cautionary note in terms of saying some of these issues should not necessarily be rushed, should be well thought of, be based not necessarily on an immediate crisis, but on, systematic and long-term thinking. And I think, when you think of the NDB, certainly when it comes to the use of national currencies. This is something that has been on the agenda for some time. But I think the important point that Karen also raised is that how do we now move, let's say, even beyond, the renminbi, for instance, and actually bring some of these other currencies on board. So I think that's quite important. Opportunities and costs, I think definitely when it comes to the NDB, the funny thing is that some critics of the NDB say it doesn't go far enough. They say it should go further, even than, let's say, how the Bretton Woods institutions have been operating. So, criticism obviously towards the established structures have been around issues of the political conditionalities, and that at times there's a misalignment between the political conditionalities that come from the Bretton Woods institutions and some of the development priorities of developing countries themselves. And that what they've done is to erode some of the policy space of developing countries. And this has had a detrimental effect on the development trajectory of some of these countries. And, some of these countries that have established the NDB are acutely aware of some of this criticism because they themselves have been leveling this criticism towards the Bretton Woods institutions. Yeah. So it becomes quite important that they necessarily do not fall into the same trap of what they have been criticizing, right, within these structures. But I do think at a structural level and a governance level, one thing that's important is that, you don't have, everything has to be taken by consensus. I mean, key decisions have to be done by consensus. So you don't have a situation where, maybe China has bigger financial muscle than some of the other countries and, says, hey, we contribute a higher share, we have, more votes, for instance. So it means that it may be that certain decisions might take a longer period of time to find that consensus. But once the decisions have been taken, I think movement becomes relatively quick, and they are able to avoid, the same criticism that they've leveled against others. Maybe just a last one from my side. I think, some of these points, like on social projects, but also on things like SMMEs, I think there's been really good, sort of input in this. And for me, what it does is, without necessarily me answering, is I think one of the speakers mentioned it, that it's very important that civil society organizations, that research organizations, I think one of the questions, continue to engage quite proactively with the bank, so that the element of social justice is never necessarily lost. And I know Karen has been doing also quite a lot of work in this regard, but I think this is quite important, that if the bank is to move towards a knowledge bank, it doesn't necessarily think that all the ideas have to be generated within the bank, but it has to acknowledge the work that is already happening within not only BRICS countries, but within the global south. Because I would argue that a lot of the ideas that the NDB and the BRICS are actually championing are not necessarily ideas that are exclusive to the 5 member states. I mean, these are ideas that have been generated over a period of time by countries of the global south, and it becomes important that the bank finds a way to build these networks of knowledge actors, but also of civil society groups that want to make sure that issues of social justice remain central. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Karen?
The order. Thanks for the difference. I'd like to tackle the question on the need to align more NGB funding with South African projects and the argument that has been made about the NGB supposedly favoring Asian countries. Beginning with the second one, I don't agree with this statement. Certainly much of the thinking that has been put into building the institution in the first place certainly comes reflects a lot of the experience that Asian countries in here, not just China, but also India, and the dynamics between the two included have put into the creation of the NGB. It's fair to say that in the first years, India and China were the countries that had the larger recipients of NGB loans, and including because the way projects are proposed to the bank from these countries is completely different from the processes that countries like Brazil and South Africa have to go through, which is a much more bottom-up process that needs different approvals by different entities until it reaches ministries of finance and then are proposed to the bank. Process in India and China is the opposite, so it's much easier for these countries to come up with projects. But this is to say that now, and especially after the creation of the original offices, there is much more balance in terms of the lending to the different 5 countries. So I'm not quite sure what is the latest share of how much finance goes to each of the 8 now members, right? But it's certainly much, the gap is much less, much smaller compared to between what India and China, for example, were receiving at the beginning and the other 3 members are receiving. It's much more balanced now. And again, the regional offices, they certainly play a role in connecting and liaising with the governments to assess what are the needs and demands and how to align with the development priorities of these countries. So, and again, not only governments, but it ideally would like to see more of this engagement with other segments of the society as well, so that these needs are even more reflective of the different demands coming from the different countries, and it's probably the case of South Africa too. On the so what of BRICS development finance and the issue on women, on gender, I've seen a lot of discussion about gender in the NZB, both in terms of mainstreaming gender in projects. Yes, there are provisions in the social and environmental framework of the NZB to look at gender and gender mainstreaming in project assessment. Now they have an independent evaluation office that is also considering these issues, but certainly there is a lot to be done still in terms of gender mainstreaming in operations and projects. And there is another way to look at gender, which is at the institutional level, right? So like staff, representation of women among the staff. And again, this is still a work in progress to my perspective. To begin with, the goals that the NGB has set for itself in the current strategy to bring gender 40% of women representation in staff, and which strikes me because the world is talking about gender balance, right? 50-50. I'm not quite sure why this magic 40 number came from, but so that's the target. And currently, approximately 32% of NZB staff is women. So, well, it's not that far from the target, like the local currency lending, right? But again, the devil lies in the details. If you break down this percentage, you'll see that the larger proportion of women are actually at the entry levels. And when you go up The latter, like classic problem, right? Classic problem everywhere. So we have 23% of women in management level, and we don't have official figures for women at leadership positions at the Becky. That speaks for itself. So yes, so it's still definitely an issue to discuss, to improve. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. Professor K?
Yeah, thank you. My answer should be very short. Yeah, because as I mentioned, for us, we focus on the micro angle. So for us, we just focus on the thesis in practice. So we are not the policy maker, but we can provide the report to the government or to some institution to assist them to do the policy make about the financing and the NDB. So I am interested in the third question about BRICS market, because now we are doing this. So if we are doing this, so we can share the experience in terms of this question. So how to access the market from BRICS and how to access the capital from the NDB. Just now, as our colleagues in this room mentioned, so very few South African company they get the loan or get the fund from this NDB. So I just now I went through the last 5 years project. Just 5 projects, 5 or 6 projects from South Africa, from our South African side, but majority of them from other countries. So I just want to use the second one, the second question from online. We need to find the new model. Yeah, because we know every single project of funding is more than $100 million. It's not small money. So it means what? For private, for even it's just 5 or 6 opportunity. So it cannot be go to the private sector or go to the SME, because you know this is a big money. If they want to get a loan, they should have something. And then now we are doing the high technology agriculture farm in Mpumalanga. So for this one, it's roughly 650 hectares. And now we assist them to get the market from China. So China side now need 70,000 tons of maize from there. And so we provide this opportunity. And in the future, China side they need the 500,000 tons of maize from our South Africa. Maybe in the future they need more. If 500,000 tons of maize. Now this one is I think it's more than 100, maybe 200 or maybe 500 millions rand or dollars. Sorry, CNY. So it's a big. So that one we can negotiate. We can assist them to talk to the NDB to get loan. So for us, we use this model. Also, my sister in this room mentioned about the woman empowerment. So now we are doing this. Even for the women, I think it's very difficult for them to get funds. Now we are doing this. Firstly, I think the training is very important. Because I mentioned the whole value chain. Firstly, to train the woman. Okay, for example, in KZN, now they are in Durban. There are lots of the beadworks. So for them, for the young, as Prof. I'm sorry, I changed the title as Prof. Filani mentioned. So for the young female entrepreneur, so it's fine. They can get the climate from the international, from the local market. But for older one, you know, they have do this for roughly 50 years. But it's very difficult for them to get the market. So we will train them. After that, we will discuss the financial support, because you can for more one for the SME they can get from the local government, maybe from provincial government, from the department, national department. But for this NDB, I think we need organize a new model. What kind of new model? I give you one example after that, so I will wrap up. So now we are doing the high technology agriculture hub in South Africa. For this one, we will invest roughly, I think roughly 200 million Chinese yuan is nationwide. So for that one, we have the different experimental farm. We have the incubation center. We have the agriculture processing center. We have training center. We have training hall. We have the innovation and entrepreneurship center there. It's Miss Watch. While this one, for example, just for Miss, we will use the technology maybe from China, from South Africa, from Africa, from Europe, from America to improve the quality or quantity of this one. After that one, we will expand this. We will for commercial farmers is fine, but for small farmers, we need to use this model to organize them together to use this technology, maybe to get some cheaper and high quality the agriculture machinery or agriculture material, such as the biotechnology for small farmers, because for them it's very difficult for them to access this market or access this material. After that, so for them the organization is big enough to talk to the NDP. So I just want to give you a very small example, but for different sector we use the same model to talk. In the future, I'm so appreciated to get this platform, because from this platform I know more about the NDP. In the future, we will organize the small farmers as stakeholders to talk to the NDP, talk to the China Africa, I think China Africa fund development, something like this. We will talk with the different bank, different platform to assist our small farmers or stakeholders, or maybe the SME or the female entrepreneurs get more opportunity for in terms of finance, the capital and fund. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. We are also excited to hear from you about the issues that are happening on the ground.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is absolutely great. We will squeeze in furthermore. That's going to be very last opportunity. Yanga will have you. Do you have any other? I'm looking toward the end of my table. That brother right at the end of the table usually speaks. While I look this side, I would also look again to his direction, just to see if anyone should go. No one here, I'll look again that direction. You're quiet today, Mugabo. Oh, okay. Online, everybody's okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Three things. I agree with Prof.
There's someone online as well.
Yeah.
I agree with Professor Karinia. In the last few years, there's a lot of improvement in terms of distribution of the BRICS funds. For example, in South Africa, we've received about 5.8 billion compared to the total 38 billion for countries. So if you look at it, it looks more or less fair. But if you take out ESCOM and transfer funding, then the numbers are way bad, very bad.
Yeah,
very bad. So if you look at it, the bank will say, look, we've got fair amount, because if you look at the numbers, but it only went into two entities, which are mainly government owned. That's number one. Number two is, I didn't hear an answer from you, maybe Prof, was that, is there room for IPATC to assist the bank to be more capacitated? Because clearly there's an issue of capacity within the bank. It needs to be assisted so that it's able to address the issues and the problems that South Africa and Africa as a whole have. So that we won't say, okay, this is how the bank operates in China or Russia, and then we'll do the same, because the dynamics are totally different between Russia and South Africa. And then number three, the last one, on the follow-up, is it possible to invite someone from the bank so that they can also answer for themselves, these questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Often make an endeavor to get the people from the bank, I think the smaller number or the local office. Very important to keep them in this engagement. Online, I have Rastafarian in Melvin. Jared.
Greetings, everyone. Yeah, I'm coming from a perspective of, let's say, civil society. I'm working for an organization called RAN, which is Reform the United Nations now, which is it has a focus on doing the lobbying work actually to reform the UN Security Council, but also other international organizations related to the Security Council and also to the global financial infrastructure, which is usually your Bretton Woods institutes, your IMF, your World Bank, and etc. So leadership, my question and my concerns in that sense is, there's the gap, the GATT and all the international agreements that some BRICS countries are part and parcel of, treaties that are part and parcel of, and that don't necessarily agree with the future trajectory of what BRICS or the multipolar lobby is wanting. So how do we then navigate that playing field so that it doesn't become detrimental towards societies within the South, as we've seen how trade embargoes has destroyed so-called socialist countries, and then neoliberal capitalist people will always tell you that socialism fails, but they won't explain how the West is actually, through their financial oppression, perpetuating these things. And also in terms of neoliberalism, which creates a very individualistic world, and I would like to believe that BRICS, like the president of Eritrea said, that we're not saying Russia must lead the global transformation, but Russia is the head of the snake, in that sense, or the head of the pin. So that is my question and concern, with regards to the Bretton Woods institutes and how they oppress countries. How will BRICS and the Development Bank, because we have faith and we believe in that the world will change for the betterment of humanity, that financial inequality, global structural violence will be done away with. But we know it's a journey to there, and we are doing the work as academics, as researchers, as coordinators on the ground. So that is my question. How do we, because it's a political question, it's the government, the state, they will have to deal with these things. Then there's also the issue of the AU and the Agenda 2063, which also speaks about Africa having a developmental bank. How would my leadership and the advisors and the academics and scholars sitting there give me or give a general overview as to how the future generations will navigate these blockages? Thank you, leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And then very lastly, Felipe Porto. Please keep it short. We've run out of time. Yes, Felipe? Philip?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please.
Well, I have a brief question regarding Russia, Ukraine, and all the criticism towards BRICS. The way I see media putting it and other analysts, it seems to me like there's a new NATO taking shape inside the group. So my very objective question is, how do you see BRICS navigating this criticism regarding Russia and Ukraine? I mean, in terms of offering some sort of solution in terms of diplomacy and something more meaningful, so that it can tackle this criticism of image at first.
Thank you very much, Mika. Ask them a very difficult question to mark the end of this. Very difficult one.
Thank you, Prof. I will try, but I'm sure they will find it quite easy.
Yeah, of course. This one.
I'm interested in the relationship between the NDB and BRICS. Now, having spoken to a few officials of the NDB, there's a challenge that I've picked up, and that the NDB wants to support the BRICS agenda, whether the development finance and so on. But the challenge that the NDB has is that it operates in a financial architecture that it does not control. For instance, it's just as vulnerable, to sanctions or to ratings agencies, and so on. The one example, for instance, that would be given would be, okay, they want to finance certain development projects in developing countries, particularly in the context of a just transition. Developing countries, the developing economies do not have the requisite finance, to swiftly move, to greener energies and technologies and so on, but still need, for instance, things like energy. And in the meantime, between the time that between now and the time that they acquire greener energies, it means that they have to use fossil fuels, for instance. And the NDB, would want to finance even just those projects, that are not as green, but are somewhat in transition, to and the challenge that they have, therefore, if they finance something that isn't green, and yet the whole global financial market is going green and frowns upon the financing of projects that are not so green, it gets into trouble, so to speak. How do you see the BRICS bloc, the political bloc, if you like, making life easier, or at least the mandate of the BRICS Bank a little bit easier to be able to fulfill its mandate of supporting the political bloc in its development agenda? And the sort of protocols, what protections would the NDB be able to get from the bloc itself in that? Thank you.
Yeah, Meka, I said ask a difficult question, not an impossible question. Now deep into the game. Thank you very much. I'd like to reverse the order. I'll start with Professor Kim. Please answer the question, Professor Kim. We trust you.
Okay, nice. For me, for this time, there's not much question directly to me.
Yes.
To me directly, but
yes.
I like this one. I like the difficult one. For me, I like the difficult question.
Maybe just your passing comment.
Yes, but for this one, I think as our colleagues mentioned, for the NDB strategy, and also for me, from my side, just the one sentence. So, I think for this NDB is just to follow the BRICS strategy in terms of the economic growth and environmental or social sustainability. So we are not focused on many areas. So we should talk as an academic. We need to talk with the government and talk to maybe the senior managers, with the CEO, with something like this. We also need to go to the ground. We should let them understand from other areas. They also need the support. So for me, we are in the same page. So we need to fight. We need to talk to them. We need to negotiate. Yeah, this is my answer for this one. For other, I think just to let our colleagues to answer the other question. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. That was very clever. From Karin, we trust you. We trust you.
I'll stick to the challenges that you all of them are challenging things. This is definitely a challenge, right? How to, and it's the classic quote by Inca America, that it's easier to join a liberal system to overturn it, right? I think we have to bear in mind that it's a bank. It does development and it aspires to be new. So we have three pieces there, but beginning with the bank, it's a financial institution to begin with. Right, and that's one of the foundational pillars from my perspective. And as a bank, it still operates in a financial system where the rating agencies that evaluate the NDB, the AIIB, the AGB countries are in New York, are in London, right? And then they have parameters that require financial institutions to navigate through them as well if they want to have a higher credit rate and having a higher credit rating, being able to mobilize capital cheaper and therefore lend cheaper and be in the game, remain in the game, right? Remain relevant. So I think that's a first piece that we have to be very pragmatic, right? As much as we aspire many of us aspire these institutions to bring innovation, they also operate in a certain environment that you cannot escape into a certain extent, right? Yes, you can bring innovations, but as you bring innovations and they create a wave and make some change in the system as a whole, it takes time, right? In the meantime, you have to calibrate strategically how you navigate it's transition. It's the challenge of any transition, right? On the specific example that you gave, financing fossil fuels where coal is the classic example, right? Which is a concern, a very legitimate concern, not only criticism, actually, not only brought by developed countries, but many of our own civil societies, right? And I may not have the answer to it, but I would like to quickly share an experience because that perhaps helps us think a little bit of how to address this challenge. In 2017, we started a project between Jindal University, Connect Us Human Rights in Brazil, and Vasuda Foundation, Oxfam in India, which was called BRICS Sustainability Index. At that time, the goal of the project was to really try to unpack the concept of sustainable infrastructure, which was at the center of the then strategy of the New Development Bank. The previous strategy had a goal to allocate at least 30% of the bank's portfolio to sustainable infrastructure projects, but they never mentioned what the bank understood by sustainable infrastructure in the first place, right? So the project intended to unpack this concept by benchmarking with different development banks and other even national development banks, and create a framework to assess the sustainability of the different projects funded by the NDB. And this framework, meaning that you don't have developing sustainable development projects where it's not a 0 or 100. It's a spectrum, right? Of course, you want projects to fall closer to this spectrum, to this end of the spectrum in which it's more in line with sustainability, whichever understanding definition you have for it and whatever framework you have to measure it, and how to do it, right? And I think that's respectful also of the challenges and the development pathways that many of these economies have had in the past, right? In which sometimes it's hard to make transition without affecting society, without leaving people in the dark, right? Or without leaving people with energy to cook or for their basic needs. So it's a very delicate balance in how to reach, and one idea that we offered at that time was to create financial and non-financial mechanisms so that the bank, in assessing its projects, but also throughout the lifetime of the project, could monitor the sustainability of these projects and offer incentives rather than regulations or disincentives, right? Or punishment. So that's very quickly the how we thought of addressing this issue at that time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Philani.
I will be brief. I think Karen has answered it on our behalf, and she's done a good job on that regard. And for me, what it reminds me is that, so the idea of reforming from within and reforming from outside, you know, and it's like balancing that. And I think they are sort of, the bank will be able to push the boundaries further based on the changing geopolitical, sort of landscape. But at the moment, it's balancing, so the BRICS countries are still within the Bretton Woods institutions. They still see them as, important. In fact, they are contributing, actively to the upkeep of the Bretton Woods institutions, yet seeking to reform them, whilst at the same time using the NDB as a practical demonstration of what an alternative could look like, but still operating within the boundaries that you mentioned. So it's quite an interesting one. And then, lastly, I think, someone asked on the Russia-Ukraine, and I think, and the role of diplomacy. I think it's important that amongst the key voices that have come out advocating for a peaceful resolution to this conflict have been countries within the BRICS. Brazil has been quite vocal in this regard. China has put out, I think, 12 points there where it towards a peace plan. There's an African delegation, obviously, that South Africa was a part of, that put out also its 10 points, for consideration by Ukraine, but also by Russia. And I would argue that that African Peace Initiative needs to go beyond Russia and Ukraine. It needs to engage the Europeans, it needs to engage the Americans, who are obviously key players in this conflict. But I think it's very important that BRICS countries, and that's goes to, I think, a comment around whether we're moving towards an alliance. This is not an alliance in a sense of a NATO style alliance. It is not an alliance. And if it were to be, to move in that direction, then what you do is just further polarize, the world into camps, which is exactly what the BRICS countries are actually trying to avoid. So I think they've played a rather responsible a responsible role in this whole conflict, because if they throw their weight fully behind Russia, you further polarize the world. And instead, what they're doing is they're using their access to Russia, but also using their access to Ukraine to try and find a middle ground. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Professor Kanyane, your final remarks, please.
Thank you. I think my final remarks is on the fact there is even a question on the Africa we want, their agenda of development bank in Africa. I think NDB enjoys its presence within the multilateral bank, so it's not going to be a threat, but it's going to be a maximized multiplier, in the syndicates of the prevailing multilateralism of this bank. So that to me is a plus than a negative. And the other important point which I want to put is that whilst we are talking, politics and diplomacies, NDB should be insulated out of those and allow, the BRICS in the summitries, and especially in the coming, summitries, to see how, they respond on even these dynamic issues of Ukraine and Russia, so that it locates itself within the BRICS as an NDB. And the crucial is the fact that, and this is my last remark, economic growth, or we should not risk, using economic growth as a proxy for development on the ground. Why I'm saying this is because we should not necessarily just see, the cash flow of the NDB growing and even the capital there. But that need to translate into transforming the society on the ground. The grassroots who are exposed to inequalities, unemployment, poverty, and even within the BRICS community, reference to India, Brazil, even South Africa. So we need to see, total transformation from within, from the ground, where these monies are filtering on the ground that translate into transforming the quality of life in the society. So it should not be a proxy for development. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, that was quite a mouthful. Thank you very much. I think they deserve a huge round of applause. And I also think that those who are online also deserve a round of applause. All that's left for me to do is to thank very much our panelists first. Thank our partner, IGD, thank our guests, and our friends. We really thank those who attended this. We look forward to seeing you at the next discussion. It's been a lively one. I just want to thank the logistics team that doing project management for this, done very, very well. Do take some snacks if you are here, but if you are online, just imagine the snacks. it is still okay to imagine the snacks. Can I request that all of us who are here move closer to the screen while those who are online are still online, and request that those who are online, can they put their cameras on just for one small little picture, so that at least though we will eat alone, we can then have a picture together. Can we move quickly to that side? Those who are online, please turn your cameras on. I know the team will then move them to a gallery view, so that all of them, we don't have a speaker view with one person, so that all of them will be visible, and then we can stand that next to them. I think so. Possible. I think we can come in as well. Come in. We just.
Sorry, I have to give them access to put on their cameras first.
And the speaker mode. The speaker view.
Oh, one is up.
Yeah, then it will work. Who's going to take us a picture?
I will.
Whoever has a camera better than Nokia. So, Madame, please don't leave
I want to be off.
Be good. One year, good to see you. Oh, maybe it means we must space up a little bit so that we can see them. Then we can see it. Yes. Oh, perfect idea. Please sit. Please somebody sit. Please. No. Please just sit. It will work. I think it works that way. Okay. And you can see many of these people. Oh, that's great. If most of us sit, yeah, please put more seats. Yeah, please sit there. Bring on. No, you see, I'm a host. I am a host. You're too tall to stand. Just this sit. Please come. Sorry.
I will try and fit, but it is a bit wide, but it's okay because we're getting the back as well.
Can you stand in between the screens? Yeah. That is good. Okay. So stand in between the screens. Yeah. Nice. Perfect. I'm smiling.
Yes, please smile.
You can chant a smile. It's still okay. Those online, your video is on, please. Pictures on.
Perfect.
Thank you. Wow. Very good. We will eat with you in mind, guys.
Yeah,
nice.
Yeah,
very much so.
I learned a lot from you. Thank you. I learned a lot from you.
Yeah.
Every time,